Hello and welcome to another episode of the Little Knowledge Podcast with me, Paul Busby, and as ever, Goff Morgan. Hello, Goff.
Hello. Greetings to you. How are we doing, Busby?
I'm very well. Are you ready to explore?
I am agog with anticipation. That's the best way to describe it. Absolutely, I'm there. I have a cup of tea ready to go. I'm complete.
You're all ready? Well, we'll get a start on then, shall we? Oh, by the way, can I plug our next episode before we start?
Yep. Well,
Our next episode will be on the 30th of December, and it'll be a review of the year. So the bits we missed, we'll go back to the other properties, and you might just get a photograph of Goff dressed as Mr. Bumble. So something to click on for, really, isn't it?
well, it's a treat for you all. That's all I can say.
Not necessarily for Goff, but a treat for us all. But today, Goff, we are back in the Abergavenny area.
Splendid.
They just have so many decent historical houses around Abergavenny. And this one, Llanvihangel Court, is a particularly intriguing one, especially in one period of history.
Yeah.
And I think that the Skirrid itself, which is very close. In fact, I'll tell you what, let me show you where we are before anything else.
Okay.
Here we are, back to trusty old Google Maps. This is the village of Llanvihangel Court. And you can see that we have, here is the court. So you go through here and you take a turn and there is the court. You have got the Skirrid Inn, which you can see up here. You might be familiar with the village. And at the south of Llanvihangel Court is something that really is a member of the cast. It's a character in this story, and that's the famous hill that is the Skirrid itself. Now, Goff, would you like to set the scene for us about the Skirrid so we know where we are?
Okay. Here you are. This is the Skirrid.
There she is.
There she is, the Skirrid. It's you cannot miss it when you come at it at this angle because of that wonderful great gouge out of the top of the mountain. It's the Skirrid is an anglicisation of its Welsh name, which is Ysgyrrid Fawr. So Skirrid is again an anglicisation of Ysgyrrid. It's a wonderful name, really, and I got a very interesting translation of it because Ysgyrrid means trembling or shaking, and Fawr means large or big. So you can say that Ysgyrrid Fawr, its translation is the big shaky. This is the big shaky. And it's wonderful because it's just a very loose and structured. That great scoop out of it was a massive landslide. And it is still prone to landslides even today, apparently, maintained by the National Trust, which I did not know. Yes, I'm surprised how much land they actually manage around this area. But again, it's part of a great legend because its local name is also the Holy Mountain, because there's a legend that at the time of the crucifixion, lightning struck the top of the Skirrid Mountain, and that's where this great gouge was knocked out of it. Possibly it's also referred to, there's the remains of an old chapel to St. Michael on the top of it as well. Roman Catholics would pray during the Restoration period. So again, we're back to that predominance of Roman Catholicism within our area as well. Even on the top of that mountain, there's a little Roman Catholic chapel. But of course, it also gives its name to this place, the Skirrid Inn. Certainly marvellous place, the Skirrid Inn. Really, it's quite tremendous. It's believed to be one of the oldest inns in Wales. They're being here around about 1110 period. Though it wasn't called the Skirrid Inn at the time, it was called something else. What was it, Paul? You did tell me.
I did have it. It was either Millbrook or Millford or something to do with a mill. Yeah, I was reading a paper about Llantony Abbey and it mentioned it, but I haven't made a note of it, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah. So the Gwent and Glamorgan and Gwent Archaeological Trust did a lot of studies of it, and they reckon that the building as it stands today is predominantly mid to late 17th century. So right about the period of some of the things we're talking about later on, which is quite intriguing. There's a massive fireplace within there. I mean, it's a huge lump of a thing. I mean, it's a colossal heap on brick on brick on brick. And in the top of it, there's a little scoop where there's a pint of beer placed. And it is placed there every day for the devil. So should the devil arrive, obviously he's knew what happened during the crucifixion. He's going to pop along and see if anything's changed. It's there for him to obviously keep him going. So the Skirrid Inn has a fantastic reputation for all sorts of peculiar behaviors. Let me just check with the things here. There lots of ghost hunts take place in it. H&H Spooky Nights is a site I'm looking at here. They do a lot of them, and they say that there are legends of glasses flying through the air, ghostly voices in corridor, menacing shadows, the heavy thump of feet from the upper floors, and some people felt such extreme fear that they have left and never come back to the place. Not handy for a pint of an evening, I like to think. But no, it has this wonderful sort of creepy supernatural experience to it. And it's also believed to be one of the rallying points for the Glyndŵr Rebellion in the 14th century. They believe that there were cases of, it was part of the Judge Jeffreys' infamous bloody assizes when they put down the Monmouth Rebellion, though funny enough, the Monmouth Rebellion had absolutely nothing to do with Monmouth. It was just the Duke of Monmouth who tried to take over from James II. And there isn't any evidence to say that Jeffreys actually got here at any point or even turned up at any point. But it is still quite, an interesting idea. A lot of its sinister reputation is based upon, there's the pub sign. You can see the lightning striking it at the time of the crucifixion. But a lot of its sinister reputation is based upon this, which is the infamous hanging staircase. Because at one point it's believed that the inn was used as a courtroom for the touring courts. As we know, whenever we come across a murder or something in this area, they go straight to the local pub. Well, apparently in some areas they also use the judicial proceedings are held within them as well. And it's up to about 180 people, they believe, were hung up that staircase. It's a gruesome thing to consider. What was interesting, remember, we looked at one property recently, I think it was Cefn Mambley, where they had a very old square staircase within it.
Oh, it was Treowen, Goff.
Treowen, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Very, very similar to this, which made me wonder whether, again, that if it had been used to the court at some point. Because hangings at this point weren't hangings in the way you think about them. They were just lynchings. A notch in the rope up there where the rope was hauled up. And he basically put the rope around your neck and lynched you up when everybody stood around the signs having a good laugh. What a way to go. So 180 people. So a lot of it's a pub with a very interesting reputation and interesting background in history. Some of it is very, very conjectural, or likely, but it is still a great fun. Like I say, in part of this place, a great legend and great history, because this is a very, very ancient area.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a character. I mean, the Skirrid is a character. As you put out, almost the inn as well. I mean, the inn has seen practically everything we're going to be talking about today in one form or another, hasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Now I want to. Oh gosh, there's my one of the Skirrid. By the way, did you find the Jack of Kent legend? I like Jack of Kent. He's particularly splendid. Jack of Kent. I mean, as we know, the Skirrid Inn is the devil's local.
Yeah.
And Jack of Kent was always having bets with the devil. He's very big in Monmouthshire and Hereford, is Jack of Kent. I don't know what he's like in Kent, but anyway. And one of the stories, one of the legends is they had a bet over what was bigger, the Malvern Hills or the Sugarloaf Mountain. The Sugarloaf. And Jack of Kent said it was the Sugarloaf, and the devil said it was the Malvern Hills. And Jack of Kent won, and the devil wasn't having this. So he scooped up soil from the Sugarloaf to put it on top of the Malvern Hills. And as he sailed across the Skirrid, his apron strings burst out and he dropped the soil, which created this tump.
Oh, right.
Dear old Jack of Kent.
I'm just slightly puzzled by the fact that the devil's wearing an apron.
The devil needs an apron, Goff.
He's obviously very neat when he is scooping that. He doesn't want to get anything on his devilish trousers.
That's right. He's also got the devil's table on the Skirrid. This is the devil's table.
Hey, that's fantastic.
And the reason I'm mentioning this very briefly is that because I'm a great fan of the 19th century chancer who declared that he was a wizard and a conjurer, and he would actually climb up to the Skirrid, set up home near the table, and then for a fee, of course, he would solve your problems with magic. He was like an agony uncle set up at the devil's table on the Skirrid, which I'm particularly fond of.
Yeah, good Lord, that's fantastic.
But here we are, Llanvihangel Court. And as you can see, the Skirrid is in the background there. So that's where we are, Llanvihangel. It's the first mention is sort of 1471, that sort of area. But nothing, as far as I know, of that house remains. It was owned, so it's Henry VI's time. It was owned by a man called Thomas ap Gwilym Jenkin in 1471. But a branch of the Morgans took over it in the Elizabethan era. No great surprise there.
Quite, yes. And
this was a Rhys Morgan, and he decided to remodel it because the previous house was inferior. And this is the oldest surviving bit that Rhys did in 1559. It's called the Eastern Front. And if you look at it, Goff, certainly the gables, the pointy gables, might remind you of Trio Inn.
Yes.
But certainly the use of the dormer windows certainly reminds me of St. Fagans. And although we haven't done a program on St. Fagans yet, we will at some point. Yeah. So Rhys set up there.
It's an interesting facade there. It looks like there should be a door in the middle of it, isn't there? But it's not there anymore. It's just a blank space.
It's not there anymore. It's been altered. They moved the front door in the 17th century.
Well, that looks like it should have been there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. This is the earliest image of Llanvihangel Court.
Oh, brilliant.
The earliest recorded. But what I love about this, and why this is so unusual, at least in my eyes, is someone's done a bird's eye view.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
You can't send a drone up.
No, they do that. And also, I love the size of the Skirrid behind it. It's just
it's
unfeasibly large.
I said the Skirrid was an actor. The Skirrid was an actor in our play, but it's overacting something rotten on that one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's positively upstaging, isn't it?
Let's have a little look at the court before we delve into the history, shall we? That's always a very good idea. Because as we go in,
oh gosh,
and these are Coughlin photographs, which are taken in the sort of middle of the 20th century, but they do give you a nice idea. And as you can see, they're all labeled. So you've got the hall and these ceilings.
I'm going to say, yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
Essentially, people say it's around about 1600. It's an early, I know Rhys did a lot in the 1550s, but it's essentially an early 17th century house. The Victorians didn't really mess with it much. Nothing added on in the 18th century as such. So it's why someone has said it is the most important circa 1600 houses in Monmouthshire.
Oh, gosh.
Look at that for a door.
Oh. Yeah. It's very armoured for an interior door, isn't it?
It is very armoured. Now, the staircase, if you look at the design, we've got these barley twists we saw at Troy.
Yes.
And which you can see in various places at Tredegar House as well, which dates this staircase to be, I think, a replacement around about a bit later on in the 17th century, maybe the late 17th century, because it's that kind of style.
Yeah.
You're going up, you see an image there, which I will come back to. If we get to the turn of the staircase, so again, it's a wonderful staircase, and there's another image there. So let's examine these stained glass images.
Yeah.
One is of King Charles I and his family.
Interesting.
Now, legends...
Royalist sympathies, perhaps, during the Civil War?
Maybe. They didn't seem to play an extraordinarily active part in the Civil War for age reasons more than anything else. Yeah. But there is, nevertheless, a legend that King Charles I stayed at Llanvihangel Court. Now, the diaries of Symonds and the diaries of the time don't confirm it, but then they didn't at Kevin Mabley either, if you remember. And Kevin Mabley were absolutely certain that Charles I stayed there. So perhaps he did. We just don't have the documentary evidence to survive. There is circumstantial evidence because, of course, Raglan Castle isn't a million miles away, is it?
Yeah.
And they say he stayed here in 1645, which was when King Charles I was indeed in the area.
Oh yeah, yes, well, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, it's not impossible, isn't it? It's giving his, his PR troop up the marches. Um,
Yeah,
it's on the route it's on the route almost to many of the places he was going, or adjacent to many of the places he was going.
I can defend Charles I, absolutely. I struggle to defend this, this piece of stained
Elizabeth.
glass because I can't find any record of it saying Elizabeth I stayed at the court before the 19th century.
Oh, right.
And indeed, both sets of painted glass windows are circa 1905.
Oh, right.
And when I tell you about the lady who owned Llanvihangel Court in 1905, you might think that it's sort of reaching a little bit historically, but nevertheless, a legend is a legend.
Oh, yeah.
And so we have places like this, the King's Room.
King Charles' first bedroom, yeah.
You can see, however, the plaster ceiling is gone here.
Yeah.
So you've just got the joists, the beams. And we got this
like
one.
Go back a minute. That looked like Delft tiles in the fireplace.
Oh, yeah, that was Delft tiles then. Yeah, a little bit later, late 17th century, probably early 18th. Now, these ceilings, they look extraordinary, don't they? They look brilliant. They are brilliant, but they might be too brilliant, too smooth.
Oh, you mean?
There was a book, a paper written, I think in the 19th, early 20th century about Tudor ceilings in Britain, and they didn't include Llanvihangel Court. So to be conservative, the experts have said this is either an early 17th century ceiling or a very good Victorian reproduction. So we're not sure which, but you can understand them being conservative about that, can't you? Yeah. Tell you what is original, the panelling.
Yeah, and of course it is Queen Elizabeth's bedroom as well.
Yeah, I know I'm struggling to defend that one, but but this is amazing. Their stable block is tremendous.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It's grade 1 listed, but it's still the same inside than outside, and that's very rare for stables in Monmouthshire.
Those end pieces on the stables are quite interesting. They look like little beehives.
Oh yes, yeah.
Why that is? I wonder why they chose beehives as a motif.
Oh, you mean the heel posts?
Yeah, beehives.
Yeah, they do look like that.
Because otherwise you get pineapples and
acorns.
All sorts of things, and acorns topped over there, but that really does look like a beehive.
It's great though, isn't it?
Lovely, wonderful.
I mean, if the king had stayed, and he may well have, remember, King Charles I. This isn't just the building; these are the very heel posts that the horses would have actually been tied up at. I mean, the stables are magnificent; they really are. Yeah. Now, it's the problem. It's a very confusing architecture. We're not going to get into incredible detail here, of course, but this is the eastern front, which, as you know, was Rhys Morgan's, the oldest bit, 1559. And we've got a sundial which has been placed onto an existing wall, which says NA 1627. And that's for Nicholas Arnold. See, what happened was Rhys Morgan was succeeded by his son Anthony, without getting all big gap. Yeah. And Anthony Morgan moved to Northamptonshire, to Hayford, to marry an heiress, which is always a terribly good idea. Yeah. And her name was already Morgan, which was handy.
Oh, good lord.
No need to change the visitor cards. He married Bridget Morgan, and when Anthony died, Bridget Morgan married Sir William Morgan of Tredegar House. So she married twice and didn't once have to change her name.
It's very handy that perhaps she just had a thing about marrying people called Morgan.
I think it's safe to say she had a type. Yeah. But anyway, the coming of the Arnolds is a big part of our story, the coming of the Arnolds. They were descended from a chap who took Llantony Priory during the dissolution of the monasteries. And of course, Llantony is very close. And as I think you pointed out, it's on the pilgrim route. So people might have stopped at the Skirrid Inn. Pubs and inns at the time were often linked to monasteries and priories because it's all part of the tourism, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
if you're on the pilgrim route. Yeah. And the Arnolds claimed descent from the kings of Gwent, but then lots of aristocratic Welsh families did exactly the same. The fun thing about Nicholas Arnold was, although it became fun, and he had a terrible trouble with money all his life. His dad had died young, unfortunately, so he needed to become a ward. And they thought, we need someone illustrious to take him as a ward. So the Earl of Pembroke, when in doubt, choose a Herbert. And clearly, the Earl of Pembroke was not keen at all about this, because he passed the duty onto his steward, Sir Thomas Morgan of Rupera Castle, and this might be him.
Oh, right. He looks familiar. Where have I can't think if I might have seen him. He does look familiar.
You saw him at Tredegar House.
Oh, I did I? Oh, right, there we are. There we go.
It was bought back within the last decade, although years do disappear so quickly. Yeah. And although it says it is Morgan of Macon, the dates don't fit. Morgan of Tredegar, the dates don't fit. Yeah. But Morgan of Rupera fits perfectly.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm not saying he is Sir Thomas Morgan of Rupera, but he might be.
Yeah.
And anyway, Sir Thomas clearly wasn't that enthused at having this little Arnold ward, because he merrily started looting his estate, plumbing as much money as he could out of the little Arnold's estate.
Good grief.
In later years, the Arnolds claimed that Sir Thomas Morgan of Rupera managed to get £20,000 out of their estate. So he was milking them for all he was worth.
That's an astonishing amount of money for the time. I mean, it really is.
It is a lot of money, but so Nicholas finally gets his majority and runs away, obviously, from his villainous sort of guardian, and he's immediately forced to borrow money and mortgage lands just to get by.
Oh,
but he still has enough money in 1623 to buy Llanvihangel Court, so he can't have been utterly destitute. But he was in trouble, and the creditors. The wings of the creditors got closer. And you know the solution, Goff, back then, if you were heavily in debt and the creditors were coming closer and closer? The solution is...
Go to see a loan shark. They seem to go see loan sharks a great deal.
No, that ruined Llanwern. No, a better. Fail-safe. Become an MP.
Oh, of course, yes, because you couldn't be imprisoned for debt or be bankrupt or anything, could you, if you remember Parliament?
Exactly. So Nicholas Arnold becomes an MP for Monmouthshire in 1626, and we think his friend, Sir William Morgan of Tredegar, helped him out, helped him get it. He called Sir William my kinsman and intimate friend. So old Sir William managed to get him the gig as MP for Monmouthshire, it would seem. But they caught up with him eventually, and in 1642, Nicholas Arnold of Llanvihangel was imprisoned at an old favourite place of ours. It's appeared many times on this podcast, King's Bench Debtors' Prison.
Oh, God, yes. It's astonishing the number of people who've wound up in that.
Valentine Morris and Llanwern. But he was quite stubborn, this chap, because he didn't want to pay his creditors whatsoever. So it said that he stayed in prison for 20 years.
Good.
Dying to defeat his creditors. So come on, who had the last laugh? Nicholas Arnold.
He could have had, because again, your standard of living within there depended on what you wanted to pay for. So I mean, he might have had the ability to actually pay for some reasonably comfy lodgings within the area.
Oh yeah, yes, he could have, but he chose not to.
No, I mean, you could have come in the prison. I mean,
yes, it wasn't bread and water in a debtor's prison.
No.
Not the King's Bench. It was, like you say, it's like Tower of London. You have lodgings if you're pretty well. Well, you're not well off, but you know what I mean. If you have connections, debtors weren't thrown in there with gruel, so to speak, especially with connections. Now, his son became one of the most notorious men in Monmouthshire of this time, and that is John Arnold. And this view that I have here, that I've put up, worried John Arnold. It gave him sleepless nights. But it came on very suddenly, these worries and nightmares that he had. Because he started off, the Marquis of Worcester, who became the first Duke of Beaufort, was very kind to John Arnold. He made him the deputy lieutenant. He made him the captain of the county. He made him a justice of the peace. But then in 1677, John Arnold turned viciously, all of a sudden, and had a lifelong feud with the Marquis of Worcester. And it wasn't just that, other things started to worry John Arnold, such as what was going on here on top of the Skirrid.
Really?
Oh, yes, he was convinced, and gave evidence, in fact, at the House of Commons bar, that there were Catholics everywhere in Monmouthshire, and he saw hundreds of Catholics armed with rosary beads climbing up the Skirrid and at the ruins of that chapel you mentioned, St. Michael's
St.
Church,
Michael.
which you can see here the ruins of it.
Oh.
Not much of it left, but this was
gosh.
where it was. And you know what, Goff? He was right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a bizarre thing I was going to say. We know there were loads of Catholics around here at the time, and they were going up to the top of St. Michael's here to pray during the Restoration. Oh my goodness!
Yeah, but he said that
armed with rosaries.
Armed with rosaries,
sort of like the similar way you'd use a bicycle chain in a hoodlum battle, you know.
Yeah, he said that Mass in Monmouthshire was being celebrated in private and in public. He was right. That there was a Jesuit college in Herefordshire. He was right. It was funded by Raglan Castle, if you remember way back.
Right.
And that the steward of the Marquis of Worcester was an undoubted papist, which may or may not have been right. But he said all this in March 1678 to the House of Commons, who were extremely worried about all of this. Now, again, the thing is, he is right in that there are pockets of Monmouthshire which are extremely Catholic friendly, as we know, in the 17th century. The local sheriff, who was Herbert of Colebrook, another house we looked at briefly. And there's an account of people, of Catholics, being brought to trial for refusing to take the oath. And when the sheriff says about it, they put their hats on, laugh, and just walk out of the court. Enraging John Arnold, but he knows that the Herberts would protect them.
Yeah.
And Kevin Mabley, you had a Catholic protection during this time. I mean, you tried not to rub their noses in it. We saw how discreet the Kevin Mabley church was.
Yeah.
Sort of not terribly well hidden.
No, yeah, but it was, yeah.
But it was discreet. But they decided it was time to catch, because there was a frenzy going on, and they decided it was time to catch these priests. And John Arnold became the main priest hunter from Llanvihangel Court. That was the centre of priest hunting in the area. The authorities had given £50 to catch a priest. If you brought them a priest, you get £50.
Good Lord.
Arnold chipped in 200 quid of his own money. So he was extremely enthusiastic about this. Yeah. Now, there were many caught in the net, but perhaps the most famous was a chap called David Lewis, who you see here.
Yeah.
I'm afraid the knife does suggest what might happen to him in future. This painting is actually at Llantarnam Abbey, and it is based on a contemporary engraving. So it pretty much does look like David Lewis. David Lewis was an Abergavenny boy. In fact, he was the son of the headmaster of Henry VIII School in Abergavenny, which still continues to this day. Around about the age of 19, he converted to Roman Catholicism, and he was sent to Rome, where he went to the English college and trained for the priesthood. And he became a Jesuit. And they sent him back to South Wales to do what he could. Now, he was sent back. And for 28 years, that's what he did in South Wales. At night, he would travel by night very dangerously, and he was extremely generous. And of course, most people in Monmouthshire in power knew him. I mean, he was liked so much, he was called the father of the poor. So he was going about his business, well loved even by Protestants, it would seem, in the area as well. And certainly by someone like Herbert of Colebrook, who saw him almost as a friend. And you know who else was his friend for 7 or 8 years? John Arnold of Llanvihangel Court.
Oh, gosh.
Who must have known that he was a Roman Catholic priest, but they were close buddies for a very long time, until the Popish Plot frenzy started to happen. And all of a sudden, John Arnold, perhaps seeing a way up in politics, became more passionate a convert for priest hunting than David Lewis was, sometimes known as Charles Baker, because you took an alias in Rome, was for Catholicism. And finally, the net closed on him. He was betrayed, and Arnold made sure he was betrayed. And he used to stay at Llantarnam Abbey with that Catholic branch of the Morgans.
Yeah.
He used to say mass there, but he thought with the frenzy going on, David Lewis thought, well, I don't want to put the Morgans in trouble. So he left the Abbey and he moved at nearby church, you see. And he tried to stay away from the Abbey so as not to implicate the Morgans, who were his patron. So he's always thinking of other people, this man.
Yeah.
But on the 17th of November, 1678, they caught him with Catholic vestments at near St. Michael's Church, Llantarnam. And he was immediately seized. John Arnold, his former friend, appeared on the case, and he was taken to Llanvihangel Court. And he stayed in an upper room in the court under guard of two men. They took him to London, where certain leaders of the Popish Plot interviewed him, interrogated him. They couldn't get him on anything like treason, but they got him on an old law from the time of Elizabeth I, which said, if you leave the country, become a priest, and then come back and preach, that is treason. That is sedition.
No.
So they got him on that.
Yeah.
And he was condemned to be hanged, drawn, and quartered.
Oh, God almighty.
Now, the sheriff, who was a friend of his, postponed it to Arnold's fury, postponed the execution as long as he possibly could. But in what is now the grounds of Porthiccan House in Usk, on the 27th of August, 1679, the execution of David Lewis happened. The sheriff refused to turn up. The executioner refused to turn up. The carpenters of Usk hid their tools and went missing so they wouldn't be forced to create the gallows. This is how popular David Lewis was. But they finally found somebody. And they had a gallows, and there was a large crowd. And he just said, I'm only guilty of being a Christian. I knew nothing about this so-called plot. The crowd were mostly Protestants. They were hostile to the executioner. And when they hanged him, one Protestant held his hand until he died and refused to allow the executioner to start his grisly work. It was only when he was dead that he did that, and they refused to allow him to be quartered.
Oh, God.
I think that's an amazing testament to the man, isn't it?
It is, actually, isn't it? Yeah, it is, particularly in the height of that frenzy.
Well, that frenzy is, why is all this happening, Goth? What is this wave that Arnold is on?
The Popish Plot. Let me just show you. The Popish Plot was entirely down to this man, Titus Oates, Theologiae Doctor und Clericus, Doctor of Theology and Cleric.
Sounds impressive.
It does sound impressive. He is the most notorious perjurer ever to exist within English law.
Oh, sounds less impressive.
Less impressive. He was a very, very warped character. But he was a crashing sort of narcissist in a way, and a pathological liar, basically. He was born in Rutland. They're not entirely sure when, but in the early 1600s. He's a graduate of Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, though he left there without a degree. He claimed to be a Baptist at one point. He moved to baptism, joined the Church of England. Then he rejoined the established church at the Restoration, and he became a rector at All Saints Church at Hastings. But he was just, he's one of those people who sort of got into clergy because they weren't good at anything else. He didn't get a degree from St. John's College in Cambridge, and his tutor regarded him as a great dunce. Although apparently he had a good memory. He had a canting, fanatical way. It was confused. So he claimed to have had this degree and got a license to preach from the Bishop of London. That was a complete forge. He became vicar of a parish in Bobbing in Kent, and then moved on to Hastings. But at that point, he decided he wanted to become a schoolmaster. So the only way he could get the schoolmaster's post was to write scurrilous accusations against the existing schoolmaster of having had illicit sexual practices with his students.
Oh, dear.
This was proved to be complete perjury, so he was found guilty of perjury. So he fled. He ran off. He actually escaped from the prison he was put in. He got out, went off to London, and he became chaplain with the Royal Navy on the HMS Adventure, where apparently his sexual behavior on board ship was so extreme that even the Navy kicked him out. And it was again a capital offence.
I love the way you said that, by the way, Goff. Even the Navy kicked him out.
The Navy had a certain amount of tolerance, shall we say, for the behaviours which were a capital offence at the time. But he was just so you couldn't stop him. Apparently, it was really, I must complain about the chaplain. He is constantly behaving badly and has taken to performing these things at all times. Please excuse shaky handwriting. It's one of those things, So, but he got away with it because he get benefit of clergy, so he didn't do it. He goes off, and it just went on and on and on. Eventually, for some reason, he decides he's going to become a Catholic. Basically, everybody else hated him, kicked him out. But having also, prior to just going to convert, decided he's going to produce a series of anti-Catholic pamphlets with a loony called Israel Tong. I'm sorry, that's not perhaps the correct phrase to say, but Israel Tong was deranged. He was a delusional fanatic conspiracy theorist of his day, absolutely off his trolley, radical Protestant who was convinced that basically that Catholics were up to no good and the source of evil and should be stopped. But just after he'd agreed to do these pamphlets, he goes off to Jesuit houses in France, in Saint Omer, and then he moved off to Valladolid in Spain, and eventually he was sent back. I mean, I get the impression they were sick of him, so they sent him back to this country, at which point he rekindles this friendship with Tong, and they create the idea of a Catholic Popish plot to execute Charles II. And it just runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. He goes off and he makes a deposition to a Lord Chief Justice Godfrey, so Edmund Berry Godfrey. And within 10 days, Edmund Berry Godfrey has been murdered. Never worked out exactly what happened. He's just found dead in the countryside, basically, with a run through on his own sword. Nobody's ever worked out what occurred there. But this gave credence to his fanatical sort of statements of it. And it was taken up by a party within the government that were called the Country Party, who were just obsessively anti-papist. He meets let's find the Earl of Danby, who assists him to make these claims for the Privy Council, and they question him. And he makes 43 allegations against members of Catholic religious orders, including 541 Jesuits and the numerous Catholic nobles, including people like Sir George Wakeham, the Queen Catherine of Braganza's doctor, and Edmund Coleman, the secretary to Mary Modena, Duchess of York. So basically, he punches up. He doesn't just, pick on the lower orders. He goes way up the ladder. And of course, this really suited them. So they go through a series of ridiculous sort of show trials, in a way, before the Lord William Scroggs, Lord Chief Justice, an absolute sort of hellflyer judge. And it rumbles along. They get to a point, however, Charles II never really bought into it. And then Oates makes a slight mistake. He had apparently a very peculiar voice. He had a very light, squeaky voice and talked in a very affected manner. And apparently, and he stands up in front of the court and says, "I accuse the Queen of England." So basically, accuses the Queen of planning to poison the king. So Charles II is really quite had enough of this. So he actually intervenes and starts interviewing himself. Another character comes along at this point called Captain William Bedloe. Bedloe is basically a con man who will say anything for money. So he basically constructs this whole ridiculous story of this plan to murder the king in Somerset House, somebody being killed, bodies being smuggled out at night. It is an absolute lie. But again, it tends to give credence to this sort of thing. But Bedloe actually came from Chepstow. And he's a notorious con man throughout the late 17th century. And at one point, he was going across Europe with a servant claiming to be Lord Newport and basically scamming European noblemen. So he sort of gave a new life to this. I mean, Charles II was going to chuck Oates into prison, but there was an international outcry because he was the savior of the nation. So he ends up getting a pension and an apartment in Whitehall and an annual allowance of £1,200 a year, which is a phenomenal amount.
It is.
Eventually, however, Justice Scroggs starts to get sick of this and actually to realize that this is not true. So after at least 15 innocent people are executed, Scroggs starts to essentially let them off, find them innocent, and the whole thing collapses. And then there's an enormous backlash against Oates for what he's actually done. He's kicked out of his apartments. He's denounced by the king and his brother, the Duke of York. He's finally arrested for sedition, fined £100,000.
That'll do it.
That'll sort him out. When James II came to the throne, he was retired. Oates was retired, convicted and sentenced for perjury, stripped of clerical dress, imprisoned for life, and was to be whipped through the streets of London 5 days a year for the remainder of his life.
Wow.
There's a theory, there he is in the stocks.
Oh.
There's a theory that they were actually trying to kill him by bad treatment because perjury was not a capital offence. And one of the people who basically decided that he should have this severity of punishment was our old friend Judge Jeffreys, who actually condemned him in all very fulsome terms, ignoring the fact he'd actually supported him earlier on in the Popish Plot. So he had he was thoroughly caught out eventually, and probably quite deservedly. He spent 3 years in prison in total, but then William and Mary came onto the throne and they actually pardoned him and actually gave him a pension of £260 a year. Because I think they thought that he'd actually been the gull of government, because even though he was a particularly vile man, he was propped up by a particular political scope. Later, the pension was suspended, and he died in 1705, obscure and completely forgotten.
Right.
But yeah, it did. But it cost 15 people's lives, the rantings of a fanatical Protestant and a liar in the shape of Oates, who could shape it into a story.
And John Arnold went along with all of this. John
Arnold
was a huge fan of Titus.
Because the one thing that Oates did have, they said, though he was a dunce, he had a phenomenal memory. So you can never trip him up on a lie. So the Pope thing, there was absolutely zilch to it.
Right.
And again, seems to have cost David Lewis's life as well in implication.
Yeah, it did, and not just David Lewis. I mean, there were other local men who were killed in Cardiff as well. It's really quite. John Lloyd was executed in Cardiff the same year. Father Philip Evans, whose mum was from Llanvihangel. So Arnold knew the family and still dobbed them in. And Arnold wasn't finished, by the way. I mean, Arnold was furious when his arch enemy, Somerset, or the Earl of Worcester, when he became the Duke of Beaufort. So that didn't help.
An alarmy stock photo.
We have to have an alarmy stock photo. But Arnold was determined. I mean, David Lewis is interesting because David Lewis in 1970 was made a saint. So he's Saint David Lewis. And they joke at Abergavenny High School, the Henry VIII High School, that they're one of the few schools in Britain to have a saint as an old boy. David Lewis, it's perfectly true. But Arnold wasn't finished, you see. And what you put it very well. And you're also the only man in history, I think, to do an impression of Titus Oates. So well done. It's groundbreaking.
It's him to the life, him to the life.
But it did get
been in the room.
But they're desperate to get the embers of this Popish plot and fan it up into the flame again. What Arnold did was, at the aptly named Jackanapes Lane near Fleet Street in London, he was savagely attacked, and he would have been killed if it hadn't been for his whalebone corset that he was wearing. This is in 1680. He lay there, blood a-pouring, and he said the person who did it was John Giles of Usk, who was a servant of the chap you can see here. And Arnold said that he whispered in his ear as he tried to kill him, "This is for David Lewis and the Monmouthshire priests." He became an enormous hero again, Arnold. We forget that in Protestant London, he was a huge hero, the hero of the day, not in the Catholic pockets of Monmouthshire, but in London. And he absolutely was. Well, that was until I mean, historians now looking at it believe that the evidence all points to the fact that he made the whole thing up. It was a setup.
Oh, good grief.
Giles of Usk, who was Sheriff of Usk, was nowhere near him at the time, and that he may have inflicted the wounds himself. So much so, he got the name of Cutthroat Arnold.
Yeah.
He'd cut his own throat
in order to
beat you. But as the other one, he went too far. The Ferrier, who was the ambassador to Portugal, the Portuguese ambassador, said that Arnold had offered him £300 to say that he had seen Worcester at Mass in Portugal. And Arnold was quoted as saying, "We shall bring the king's head to the block. And Worcester is a papist and his crooked back son who will suffer in time." Now, that was too far because they got him finally. You know how you get Al Capone, not on what he actually did particularly, but on taxation?
Yeah.
They got him on scandalum magnatum. You weren't allowed to insult a peer quite like that. And they arrested him and fined him £10,000. So where did he end up? King's Bench Prison, where his father was.
God.
He wasn't there for 20 years. He was there for 6 years. So after all of this, he comes out of prison with all those things that had happened. And in 1689, he's elected MP for Southwark and MP for Monmouthshire at the same time.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
He eventually dies in 1702 after being a sort of a courtier in the court of William and Mary. So he didn't quite get his comeuppance ultimately. He bounced back.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the sort of the gangland boss element of it, of the area at this point, but I mean, it still hasn't gone even by the start of the 1700s then, is it? No. It's still running all the way through the 17th century. No. It's not something that you're hanging around with in the 1500s. It's gone on for a century after that. That's just corruption at a incredible level, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Shocker. So the oligarch protecting his own, isn't it?
Yeah. At the start of the 18th century, though, his son, another Nicholas Arnold, was pretty much finished in the area. He sold Llanvihangel Court, and it was bought by, for a while, by the way, in the early 17th century. I forgot to tell you, it was actually owned by the Somerset family, who, of course, later became the Dukes of Beaufort. But now another big family bought it in the 18th, and that was Edward Harley, who was the Earl of Oxford's family. And he was auditor of the imprest. So basically, he audited the government's books. Oh. And Harley was accused of embezzlement, but he proved he wasn't by actually saying, yes, £36 million I was put in charge of in the early 18th century. And when they went through the books, the only thing that was out was 3 shillings and 4pence that a clerk got wrong.
Good Lord.
So sometimes politicians are truthful, and Edward Harley was truthful.
Yeah, good grief.
But in the 19th century, it's then become a farmhouse for a farmer. I know when Archdeacon Cox visited, he didn't really go in there because he said, well, there's in 1799, because it's the home of a farmer. But have you ever read Archdeacon Cox's Climb Up the Skirrid?
No, I haven't.
Hilarious. He climbs up there, and when he gets to the top, it's obviously too much for him, and he starts fainting, and he collapses on the ground, and he then still gets his sketchbook out and starts the sketch. Takes him half hour to recover from the climb up the Skirrid. But in the 19th century, let's have a lovely snowy scene of the court in the 19th century. Isn't that great? Lovely snowy scene. It was passed through many hands, which we won't go through. There was Hugh Powell, who was treasurer of St. Bart's. He passed it on to his godson, William Powell Rodney, who was the son of the second Lord Rodney, whose sister married into Tredegar House, Sir Charles Morgan. So the Llanfihangel link between whoever was there and the Morgans of Tredegar was reinforced in the 19th century. And then even a Colonel Napier Sturt, who was the son of a famous Australian explorer, lived there for a while.
Oh, gosh.
But we get to one of my favourite characters now to finish off, because we enter the 19th century. This chap isn't my favourite character, but his wife is. This is Benjamin St. John Attwood-Mathews.
It's a wonderful set of whiskers there, isn't it?
It's
Look
not
at that.
bad. He was a member of the Alpine Club, loved to climb, so the Skirrid was nothing to this man. But he didn't actually live to enjoy the Skirrid, because he lived at a place called Pontrylas Court, which is in Hereford. There's Pontrylas Court. And he had it on what is known as a long-term lease, which a lot of these aristocrats did. They didn't necessarily own the house, but they had it on a long lease. And there was a wonderful tale of him and his wife just before the lease ran out. In June 1900, at Pontrylas Court, Hereford, they had a groom called Thomas Minton, all right, one evening. It was on May the 29th, 1900, who got drunk in the yard.
Oh, yeah.
He got drunk in the yard, and our chap came out, and he said to him, "You are to leave my service at once. You are dismissed." He locked the door at 10 p.m. You can't be drunk outside it later on. And he said, Minton said, "Well, I've got to have my money." So he gave him the money. And then Minton decided this £2 4 wasn't enough. So he said, "I'm going to go back in and smash up your house." And he ran back into this building, you see. "I'll smash everything," he said. He was found in the kitchen kicking the kitchen maids, which isn't nice. I mean, I don't want to, but there he ran in around the kitchen kicking the maids. The two footmen did nothing, Bethel and Morris, because they were afraid. They finally got him out, and he smashed 70 panes of glass in the windows of this place. The only one who wanted to fight him was actually Mrs. Attwood-Mathews, Florence, the indomitable Florence, who got a stick and was only stopped by her husband, Benjamin, who was slightly worried what would happen. But interestingly, when this all went to court later on, the truth emerged that the reason the two footmen didn't get involved was because Benjamin Attwood-Mathews had dismissed them as well.
Oh, gosh. Right, yeah.
And it goes on that they went through 50 different servants in a year.
Grief.
So Attwood-Mathews was just sacking people.
Yeah, that's
right,
one
left and centre.
Good grief.
So maybe he'd run through the servants of Hereford and decided to come to Monmouthshire, where he bought outright in 1903 Llanvihangel Court. But he didn't live. He died that year without actually moving in.
Oh, right.
So the indomitable Florence, who I wish I had a photograph of, she moved in and she made it her home. And we can see this is what it looks like in this period. This is, of course, isn't the Eastern Front. It's where they put the new door in the 17th century. And she was a wonderfully intimidating character, shall we say. In her young days, she knew a lot about Egypt. She'd gone around Egypt. She used to go to Egypt every year. Her collection of Egyptian curios, she actually, when she died, she gave them to Newport Museum. So anything Egyptian in Newport Museum is because of Florence.
All right.
Attwood-Mathews. But she was formidable. And we have testimony to this fact. I love the little things that she did. It was said she had a German housekeeper called Miss Seegers, who was in charge of everything. Her departed husband had come over with Prince Albert. He ended up down here. And Florence boasted that she'd never seen any servants' quarters in her life. But the place was full, not of just Egyptian curios, but pug dogs. It's very Duke and Duchess of Windsor, this. Savage pug dogs would be roaming the place, attacking guests at will. She owned 3 carriages, 6 coach horses. Whenever she went to the church, everyone had to stand up when she went in the church and then stand up again when she left. Her cushions had her coat of arms upon it. And what I particularly liked was her own great niece wrote about her and her sister. And this sums up Florence really quite nicely. "I can see them now, horribly stout, clad in black satin, enthroned like Eastern idols, and fondling obese little pug dogs. They reigned over their estates, Aunt Florence in Monmouthshire, Aunt Mary in Hampshire, tyrannizing over unhappy, obsequious companions. I paid by royal command one brief, terrified visit to great Aunt Florence. Her domain, Llanvihangel Court, was the grander of the two, complete with the bed in which Queen Elizabeth slept,
Yeah.
and the bloody footprint left on the stairs after a duel. That's quite a nice legend.
Oh, yeah.
From her awful eminence, she recommended that I should marry an elderly bishop. She's 17 at the time. A distant cousin of her late husband. I had, of course, never met the bishop. She lived to a great age and died unlamented. But it's the things that Florence did to Llanvihangel Court. Extraordinary. If we have a look through, that's during her time. So this is the King Charles bedroom. You can tell there's no plaster. There's the arms of King Charles I. Very impressive. And the bed. So there it is at her time.
Yeah.
Now, look very carefully at this, Goff, the bottom. Look what she's done to the eastern front. You know that plain trio in front?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what she's done is she's added these two hideous bay windows.
Yeah.
And she's added her Egyptian room.
Oh, right.
So she's added an Egyptian room with all the curios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Egyptian room's not so bad, but the windows are a bit over the top, aren't they?
I have to admit, I hoped actually that they would have kept the Egyptian room. I quite agree with you.
Yeah.
The Egyptian room is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
But my goodness, those windows. Changed the entire outlook. But as you can see, as it looks now, this is where the bay windows used to be, and this is where the Egyptian room used to be.
Yeah.
Because a chap, when she died, she tried to sell it in 1918 for £30,000, and it's so vague, the initial advert. Oh yes, Llanvihangel Court and a few cottages, £30,000, trout fishing, it's all there for you. And it didn't sell, so she was actually there until she died, which was in 1923, on Halloween 1923. Her great niece would have found that very fitting. And a chap called Mr. Bennett took over and restored it a little bit more faithfully. So the windows went, which I'm all for, but it's a shame he got rid of the Egyptian room.
It is a pity about that, yeah. That would have been nice.
Which would have been quite interesting. And in 1945, the Hopkinson family took over in 1945. That's how it looks today. And they, honestly, they were quite interesting. They were direct descendants from the Marquis of Worcester, who owned it at the start of the 17th century. So much to Arnold's fury, his old house fell back into the hands of the Somerset family. And they bought it for £15,000 in 1945. It's all very interesting. And in 1955, I don't know what you think of Fred Hando, but I'm a big fan.
Yes, yeah.
Because Fred Hando would go around to these places and he was never negative and he was never dismissive or arrogant. And he used to love the legends that people told him and he recorded them. So when he turned up at Llanvihangel Court in 1955, he wrote this: "Steps lead up from the courtyard to the outhouses and stables, where I took the chance of sketching the famous oak columns, traditionally from a wrecked Armada galleon and erected here by Spanish prisoners. In the Chestnut Avenue is a deep well to which is attached a memory. Long ago, the beloved and only son of the house drank from a pewter cup, was poisoned and died. Frantic with grief, the father collected all his pewter, which was never seen again. Of the many splendid rooms, I must note the White Room, where once was seen a little man with green eyes." Others said it was a little green man that was seen quite a lot in the White Room. The King's Room, where Charles I slept. The head of the bed on which he slept is preserved and bears the inscription, "Remember thine origin." Now that's interesting because, again, they really are going all in on this Charles I staying there, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I was glad to see it.
And that is a possibility in it. That's not an impossible.
No, Elizabeth's less likely, but Charles is definitely possible. I was glad again to see the fine coat of arms of Charles I painted on wood and decorated with mother of pearl, which young Mr. Bennett had discovered reversed behind a wall panel. Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
The arms of the Stuart kings reversed.
That's possible closet Jacobitism going on there.
Later years, absolutely.
Yeah, you haven't got rid of it, but you're hiding it, so it speaks of something doing Civil War and various things along those lines, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So I really like that. I love the fact that Fred Hando hoovers up the legends, otherwise they would be lost.
Yeah.
This is an interesting thing in the gardens. It's actually one of 3 summer houses that were in the gardens. And that's the last surviving one. They think the last one might have been a dovecote, but this was a summer house, and this survives.
Yeah.
Now guarding Llanvihangel Court is not the Pugs.
No.
It is the peacocks.
Oh, yeah.
They can apparently be just as vicious at times.
Oh, God.
Now, what happened was there was a doubt about what might happen to Llanvihangel Court in the 21st century. And luckily, riding in to save the day was a granddaughter of the Hopkinson family called Hetta Johnson. And she decided she was going to move to Llanvi, as she called it. She was going to move with her granddaughter, and she moved back there. And since then, since 2013, has opened it to the public every August. They do Christmas fairs. They even did one before the recent unpleasantness. So there are weddings. So she's done her level best to return the magic of Llanvihangel Court. I think Hetta Johnson has done a superb job, because when I show you some of the rooms to finish off, I think you'll agree. So you come into the hall, which does look very period, doesn't it?
Yeah, oh yes.
And here we are. And look, they've got a painting of that little image, the first image.
Oh, gosh, yes. Yeah.
You've seen.
The enormous Skirrid.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And the bedrooms are all set up as well. So a very interesting place all round, I think, Llanvihangel. But there we are. We've taken it up to the present day, and long may they continue. Unlike a lot of properties, this is still lived in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's quite nice, actually, to see that. Particularly some of the absolute wrecks and dead properties we caught up in recent episodes.
So before we finish, can I ask your opinion? John Arnold, did he convert to this passion, or was he swept away with the Popish Plot idea, or did he see cold-bloodedly that there was political advantage? What does your gut say about John Arnold, the priest hunter of Llanvihangel?
You could say initially that it is simple fanaticism, that he has got swept along with this, because there are radical Puritan elements, and the political fear of the papacy and the temporal power of the papacy was still here at the time. That's a lot of it about. We tend to forget that it's not simply a religious schism; it is a religious and political schism, and because the papacy was a very powerful institution across Europe. Almost bordering on theocracy to a degree. But having said that, the latter faked attempt of trying to get back into it does make you think he had other reasons for this as well. So he may have been a religious fanatic, but he certainly saw advantage to it. And when the advantage went, certainly very clear to do anything to try and get that advantage back. So overall, I'd err more towards somebody who saw where the wind was blowing and what it would blow his way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We also need to point out, though, that although he bent the law, everything he did was within the law at that time.
Oh, quite.
Perhaps it says a lot of its time.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you, Goff.
That's right fun. Very interesting.
And thank you all for listening. And do join us again, probably about December the 30th, for our final video of the year. So thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.